Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, April 8th, and um, this upcoming weekend is Easter. So tomorrow's Holy Thursday, Friday's Good Friday, and then Saturday is Easter. So um, I'm going to try to finish the chapter out, try to finish the New Deal. And then all I'm going to basically do is just give you an embedded question, probably somewhere in this video, and then this way you don't have to do any work for U.S. history over the weekend, although we will end up having a test probably either late next week or early the week after. So um, some housekeeping stuff. Let's go to our Google Classroom before we get started. All right, so here's our Google Classroom. You should have watched that video already. Start talking about the New Deal. I'm assuming you did this one. I believe it's this one that has the question in it. This one right here. Okay, that some of you guys have answered, a few of you still have not. Some people were asking me, like, how do I know if it's an assignment? This right here, this little clipboard thingy tells you it's an assignment. Okay, so you go down here, here's an assignment. Okay, here's an assignment. Here's what I want you to do. Since some of you guys are having problems with this, go to the top of the page and scroll down. If you haven't watched this, watch it. Make a list, check it off. Not very difficult, people. Then go to this one. Have I done this? Do the assignment. Click on it. Find out what it's about. Check it off your list. Okay. That the excuse that I didn't know what to do on Google Classroom, that's just because you're not checking it. Some of you guys have figured it out. My freshmen have all figured it out. So, and if you have a question, just email me. That's all. So, hope you guys are all doing good. Let's get right into this. So we're talking about the Great Depression, 1929 to 1941. Herbert Hoover's the president from 29 to 32. He does nothing. I shouldn't say he does nothing. His theory is that the economy will fix itself. It was the theory of every economist and every politician up to that time. Unemployment is massive. Stock market crashes. Runs on the banks. So he runs again in 1932, but he's defeated by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the fifth cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, who had been the governor of New York. He had polio when he was like 38 years old. He was in a wheelchair. Little interesting thing about FDR, he had these really heavy metal braces that if they clamped his legs in these metal braces and he stood behind a podium, kind of the way I'm standing right now, it made it appear he was definitely standing, and it made it appear that he could walk. He also used to have two, we would call them Secret Service men, but I don't think they had the Secret Service then. It was usually two military people that would be standing next to him in a crowd. Basically, they'd be holding him up. He did not want people to know that he was in a wheelchair because he thought that they would think that he was weak. So, but he could not walk. And many times, if you look at pictures, he'll be in a car, sitting in a car. So he's elected in 1932, and his difference between him and Hoover is that he thinks that it's the government's job, the government's responsibility to fix the economy, to infuse money into the economy. He also thinks it's the government's job to help people who are out of jobs, who are out of a job and who are suffering. Okay, so in the first discussion, we talked about some of his plans: the CCC, the WPA, the TVA. They're all 3 letters. Some of these were hire people to do things like build parks, build dams, build bring electricity to the Tennessee Valley. This was the government running these, and it was his theory was that it would give people a job, which is good for them to have a job. They would make a little bit of money, and then they would also help the infrastructure of the United States. All true. His opponent said, well, just take that money and hire companies. They'll do the same thing and they'll do it more efficiently. So that's an opinion question, whether you think that's the right way to do it or not. But let's get to what's known as the Second New Deal, okay? This included, we're talking about 1935 to 1936, still in his first term. The Second New Deal included new programs to extend federal aid and to stimulate the nation's economy. The second 100 days, remember the first 100 days were basically where Congress allowed him to pass whatever it is that he wanted to pass. After 2 years, unemployment remained high. Production still lagged. The GDP still was not catching up where it had been in the 1920s. The president called for a second new 100 days of activity, where he's just asking Congress, please okay everything that I'm going to push through Congress. So we're talking about 1935, 1936. Just a little sidebar. His wife, very famous first lady, her name's Eleanor Roosevelt. She had no health problems, so she traveled a lot, and she would bring the message of the president to much of America, and then she would come back and tell him, because for him travel was very, very difficult. She pushed for humanitarian causes. She believed in social reform. We've talked a lot about social reform during the Progressive era. She also urged the president to appoint women to government positions. So she was very much loved by the American people and very famous. Everybody knew who she was. Here's a quote by her: "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I would agree with that. So let's talk about the 1936 Olympics. No, the 1936 election. There was an Olympics in 1936, but this is the 1936 election. FDR was easily elected over Alfred Landon of Kansas, and the Democrats easily took the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the Democrats were all in charge. He's easily elected, even though the economy wasn't much better. I think people had an affinity towards him, A, for his personality, B, for the way he had the fireside chats. People felt like they knew him, but also it seemed like he was trying to do things to make the economy better. By 1936, they've been in this depression for 6 or 7 years. It's been a while. This was the first election the majority of African Americans voted Democrat. They had been voting Republican because Republican was the party of Lincoln. Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But in the 1930s, most African Americans started voting for Democrats, and FDR specifically. Until he ran against Landon and Knox. Roosevelt sweeps the nation. His electoral vote exceeds 500. So he easily is reelected. There's a map. Okay, let me get my pointer. Only Vermont and Maine voted Republican, which is ironic because Vermont's a Democratic state now. The rest of the country, they vote for FDR. So by the mid-1930s, thousands of farmers were losing their farms. We've talked about this, the drought that was going on, the Dust Bowl. More programs. Unfortunately, we just don't really have time to go over a lot of these things. Here's a couple more pictures. We've seen this picture. We've seen this. This is a guy from the Dust Bowl, maybe Oklahoma, maybe the Panhandle of Texas, just packing up his stuff and he's moving. He's going to where things are better, which I think probably in this case would have been California. That's one of the reasons that the population of California grew so much. This lady probably never even knew how famous she was going to become, but that picture is kind of the face of the Great Depression. There's a house for you. Let's pray that we don't ever get to this point again. This is a tent that they're living in. This is the same woman. That woman right there is this woman right here. You can see how destitute people were. It was just awful, just absolutely terrible. You can save someone's life, but if they have no money to live, then it's not much of a life. One of the largest programs of the Second New Deal was the WPA, which was another works program, spent $11 billion to give jobs to 8 million people, and they built 850 airports. They built 651,000 miles of roads. They built 125,000 public buildings. I don't know if any of you are into this because I don't know how important history is to you. But if you're in a city, not so much Houston, but an older city, and you go up to a bridge or maybe, I don't know, some sort of thing that was built by Public Works, many of them still have a little plaque that tells you who made it, either the CCC or the WPA. I was walking over a bridge in a park outside of Pittsburgh this summer, and it was built by the WPA. It had a little plaque that was embedded in the concrete. So most of these projects did have value. Again, the question is, should private industry be building these things or should the government? I would say private industry, but that's just kind of the way I believe it. Work promotes confidence. I would agree with this. One of the issues we're facing right now in 2020 is unemployment is through the roof. When people lose their job, they have no confidence. unconfident people tend to not spend money, which makes the economy even worse, which makes more people get laid off. It's important that people have a job. When you have a job, you have pride in yourself. So they did understand this. They did understand by putting people back to work, this would give them some pride in themselves and they would feel like they had a purpose. That's the WPA. You can read that on your own. They did pass the Fair Labor Standards Act, set a maximum of 44 hours per work week. This is for people getting paid hourly, not for people getting paid a salary. So a salary means you get a set amount. If you're making $50,000 a year, you make $50,000 a year no matter what. When you get paid hourly, if you're getting paid $10 an hour and you work 5 hours, that's $50. Seems obvious. Maybe some of you didn't know that. It also dealt with age requirements in labor. So really the Great Depression is when child labor, that type of thing, that it really ends. Government gets involved. And here's an important one. During the New Deal, Roosevelt and the Congress passed what's known as the Social Security Act. Okay, you all have a Social Security number. I don't know if you know that. Maybe some of you do. You'll need it next year when you go to fill out financial aid for college. It was passed in 1935. And basically what the Social Security Act was, it was old age insurance for people over 65 and their spouses. Okay, so half the funds came from the worker and half from their employer. So this is how it works. When I reach 65, which is 12 years from now, there is money sitting in an account that I've paid into and my employer has paid into. And then when I retire, and I can't do it before the age of 65, when I retire, I will get some of that money each month. It's not a lot of money. It's not enough money to retire on. But basically, that was the idea. Okay, the idea was that you'll pay into this, and then when you retire, you'll get this money. It's kind of like a pension, okay? And they also came up with unemployment compensation. So if you've been laid off in 2020, if you had a job and you maybe one of your parents, they're laid off or furloughed, meaning the company can't afford. It's not like you got fired because you stole money or you didn't show up for work. Then you don't get unemployment. This is when you're laid off, meaning that they just can't use you anymore, or furloughed, meaning as long as the economy is like this, we can't use you. You can apply for unemployment compensation, which means you get like 70 or 80% of your paycheck while you're looking for a job. Okay, you pay into that. It's not a gift. You pay into it, and your employer pays into it. The Social Security Act also would aid families with dependent children and people with disabilities. So if you're 18 years old or 19 years old, and heaven forbid you're in a really bad car accident and you're paralyzed, you'll get Social Security from that day on for the rest of your life. And then if you're below the age of 18, and whoever makes most of the money in your family, whether it be your mother or your father, and they die, then you'll also receive Social Security until you're 18. So that's what a Social Security card looks like. That's probably what you have. Hopefully you have one. John Q. Public is not a real person. That is just a made-up person. That's his number. So you'll have a Social Security number. It's basically your number, how the government knows you. So this is passed during the New Deal. One of the most important things, Social Security Act. So that's 2 posters for it. So there's an old man. He's probably shouldn't be smoking, but he's retired. He's getting a little bit of money. Okay, this picture is that her husband died, and this young child will receive money each month until they're 18 through the Social Security. It's kind of like a safety net. Okay. One of the things that happens during the Great Depression and during the New Deal is they bring electricity to rural areas. We talked about that with the TVA. One of the men really responsible for bringing electricity to the central part of Texas, Hill Country area, that whole area, is Lyndon Johnson, who will become president in the 1960s, LBJ. He is a congressman from a district outside of Austin, and this is what it would look like in a lot of the rural parts of the state of Texas. Okay, there's no electricity. They're living in these little shacks, washing their clothes in a tub. And LBJ works along with FDR, and he brings electricity to the rural parts of Texas. That's how he kind of becomes famous in the state of Texas. So let's just keep going forward. We're not really this is all important stuff, but we just don't have time to go over it. FDR, unfortunately, he did not push civil rights for African Americans very much. He needed the Southern Democrats to support him in his New Deal programs, and he knew if he pushed for civil rights for African Americans in the South, the abolishment of Jim Crow laws, that type of thing, that the Southern Democrats would not support his policies. So he decided to not really push for civil rights. There were a lot of labor unions. So unfortunately, we're running out of time. All right, here's what I wanted to get to. So culture in the 1930s, I like to study culture. That's my favorite thing. Motion pictures, radio, art, and literature blossomed during the New Deal. Now, you know this. Most art reflects what's going on in the country. You are going to see a lot of art that is coming out, music, movies, paintings, photographs that are going to have to do with this quarantine that we're going through. You'll see the art and the music reflect this. And the same thing happened in the 1930s, that the art and the music reflected what was going on in the country at the time. By the late 1930s, 65% of the population was attending a movie once a week. Because it's escapism. You can go to a movie, and for those 2 hours, you're not worrying about the economic plight of your family. Think about now, how many people in your family are like binging on Netflix because you can get involved in a story for 2 hours, or even a book. But in this case, we're talking about movies and TV, or TV now. It's escapism. You cannot think about what's going on for 2 hours. And this was big in the 1930s. People would save money and they would go to see a movie every week. And by 1940, 90% of American households owned a radio. So two things: they could listen to the president, they could know what's going on, but also there was like regular shows, not television shows, regular shows on the radio. So think about whatever your favorite, I don't know, maybe you just watch Ozark, maybe you just watch Tiger King, I don't know. Not Tiger King, that was a bad example because I don't know how you do that on the radio. But there were radio shows, and that kept people entertained. So probably one of the most famous movies, 1939, Gone with the Wind, which is also the same year that The Wizard of Oz came out. Here is just a general movie theater. You can see they were small. This is in a small town. This is in Lawrence, Kansas. Here's some of here are the movies of 1939. Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, The Rules of the Game, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which is a really good one. Down here, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was 1937. I'm sorry, these are not all 1930. These are during the 1930s. So you'll recognize some of these. King Kong, all important movies during the Great Depression. Art during the Great Depression, this is famous, called American Gothic. You can just see that they don't look very happy. They look like all the life's been taken out of them by the Great Depression and whatever it was that was going on in their farm. Similar with this picture. These are ghost-like characters because things were not good. Things were not happy. That's what art showed them. Dust Bowl. This guy's toiling in a factory. This picture is unbelievable. I love this picture. They're just praying. Lord, send some rain. Lord, help us out of this situation. Perhaps you've seen your family doing this over the last couple of weeks. Perhaps one of your parents or both your parents have lost their jobs, and they've prayed, Lord, just please help us get out of this situation. So art reflects what's going on in society. Guy living in a shanty town. And this is where we first see, it wasn't Batman, it was the Batman. Think about why a superhero would be great during the Great Depression, right? Like, we're looking for someone who is great, that can overcome this tragic thing that we're going through. Escapism. 1935. The New Deal affected American society not only in the 30s, but also in the decades to follow. Everyone, so this is important right here. I know I'm going long. Everyone was emotionally affected. We developed a fear of the future, which was very difficult to overcome. Even though I eventually went into some fairly good jobs, there was still the constant dread. Everything would be cut out from under you and you wouldn't know what to do. That's a guy, Ward James, quoted in this book, Hard Times. What you're going through right now, you will know that you will remember this for the rest of your life. It will affect you. Hopefully, it won't have a really detrimental effect upon you, but I'm sure every time you hear about some weird disease developing in some country, you're going to get a little bit nervous. This is what happened during the Great Depression. People were affected, right? When I was a kid, my grandmother, for instance, had grown up in the Great Depression, that generation. So we were around people all the time. They had a sense of that they saved a lot. Many of them didn't trust banks. Many of them buried money in their mattress. They were just different people. They would make you eat all the food on your plate. There was never any waste. So, and this was all because they were affected by the Great Depression. Let's skip over this. Over time, opinions of the New Deal have been from harsh criticism to great praise. Most conservatives, so Republicans, have thought that it made federal government too large, that now the federal government was there to take care of everybody all the time. They believe that the New Deal stifled free enterprise. Okay. Free enterprise is somebody just looking and saying, you know what, I have an answer for that, and coming out with some product or service, making a lot of money off it, but it helps society. That's where I think that in 2020, I think that's what's going to happen. That free enterprise, that entrepreneurs are going to figure out vaccines and drugs and whatever it is. And that will eventually get us out of this. I think capitalism is good. I think greed is good. People are going to realize, hey, if I do this, if I come up with something, then it's going to I can make a lot of money and also help society. Many liberals, so the Democrats, they didn't think the New Deal went far enough. They didn't think it pumped enough money into the economy. So on one side, you have the conservatives that thought it did too much. And on one side, you have the Democrats, should have done it the other way, have the Democrats who thought it didn't do enough, that it didn't get us out of the Great Depression. It didn't. The New Deal did not end the Great Depression. Let me repeat that. The New Deal did not end the Great Depression. I'm going to let you read that on your own. Every dollar of government spending must be raised through a dollar of taxation, Hazlitt emphasized. If the WPA builds a $10 million bridge, for example, the bridge has to be paid out of taxes. Therefore, Hazlitt observed, for every public job created by the bridge project, a private job has been destroyed somewhere else. All that has happened, at best, is that there has been diversion of job because of the project. So if the government in 2020 is giving us $2 trillion to get us out of whatever it is that we're in, that $2 trillion was raised from taxes. It was already our money, is what this guy's saying. If the government hired people during the New Deal to build a bridge, let's say they hired 100 people to build a bridge, all that did was it eliminated 100 jobs that had been with a bridge building company. So it's you didn't really create anything. That's why the New Deal did not solve the Great Depression. All you did was shuffle jobs around, and you made it look like the government cared and that the government was trying to do something. I'm going to let you read that on your own. So expanding government's role in the economy. FDR expanded the role of the federal government. That you need to know. The executive branch, which means the president, the executive branch became more powerful by infusing the economy with billions of dollars and becoming involved in labor relations. Okay, so the president became the most powerful of the three branches: the Congress, the executive branch, the Supreme Court. The president is now the most powerful of those three branches. The FDIC, which guarantees your money in a bank, and the SEC, which guarantees that, supposed to guarantee that the stock market is fair and that everybody has the same information when they want to buy and sell stock, now gave government the role of regulating business. So they regulate business, the opposite of laissez-faire. They regulate it. They decide what business can and can't do. Here's the debt that was created. Okay, so you can see that this is the debt. Some of this is the debt right here. I'm sorry. Okay, this is the debt that it created. This is the debt that's going to be created during World War II. Okay. Now, there will be a spike right here that you can't see. This is going to be the spike from the great coronavirus pandemic. Government spending $2 trillion. You can see how government spending went up and went from 2.9 billion, excuse me, to 4.5 billion. Here's gross federal debt as a percentage of GDP. So you can see, bam, this is kind of a complicated chart, but just know that it went up. So let me get out of here. All right, I'm back. All right, here's your embedded question, and then I'm going to just review what I just did. I want you to write me a paragraph about the craziest thing that's happened to either you or in your house or to your family during this time, during the lockdown. It can either be serious or it can be funny. I don't care, but just send me a paragraph. That's like 3 or 4 sentences of the craziest thing. Maybe it's something awesome. Maybe, you know what, for the first time I eat dinner with my parents every night. I don't know. Maybe it's something crazy that happened. So watch this video. There's no assignment other than to write me that paragraph about the craziest thing that's happened. And enjoy your Easter. Try to go to some sort of virtual Easter celebration and maybe a Good Friday and Holy Thursday. Monday, there'll be nothing because Monday is technically a holiday. So you don't need to check this after you watch this video. We don't really have anything until next Wednesday. So hope you're all doing well. Contact me if you need anything. Talk to you later.